Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome to another session of Deep Dive into Nizam Islam by Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabahani.
Today, inshallah, I think we will be able to complete the chapter of Al-Qada wal-Qadr and hopefully start chapter 3 by next week. So I hope we have prepared questions or even comments, because I would like to take a minute and mention that this session is not meant for people to learn this book from the beginning, because as we all know that everyone here most people here have already studied this book, if not everyone. And so this session is not to teach the concepts of the book anew. It's essentially to re-emphasize the concepts and inculcate the concepts, and so not even to reteach, because it's a fact that there are people here that could teach this, that could give and deliver the session definitely more than I do. So the aim rather here is for us to interact and through angles that others might not see. So actually, as a matter of fact, what I'm doing here is just doing my little best to provide the angles that I can see. But the reality of on this concepts is that since they relate to our reality, someone might have examples and more experience in a way that you will explain it, and in a way that will be much more clearer. So what I'm saying here is that please don't hesitate to jump in after the session, that is, to make comments, explain, like you can just literally pick a point and say, okay, when this was explained, I wanted to add or make a comment, or maybe even correction. It's entirely possible. When this was explained, I think this and that. So we all know the drill. That's the whole point of this session. It is not a murakaza, definitely, but it's a session for us to interact, for us to share. Not just for me to come and explain. As I said, I'm sure most of the brothers here have already studied this book, and they understand it, and they even teach it. Okay, so it's essential that please we interact, because sometimes we might think we have understood something, and when we make a comment, it makes it clearer, or we ask questions and so on. So what we are pushing towards, it's not just asking questions, it's making comments. Please, we want to learn from the wisdom that each and every person here can offer. Thank you very much. So we are picking up from the green section, where the Sheikh says, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created man with his instincts, organic needs, and the mind, he subhanahu wa ta'ala endowed him with the choice to carry out or abstain from an action. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not compel him to carry out or abstain from the action. Furthermore, he did not make the attributes of the objects, instincts, and organic needs in a manner that compels man to carry out or abstain from an action. Man is therefore free to perform or abstain from an action by the use of what he granted him of the distinguishing mind, and he made it the place of Sharia responsibility. Accordingly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward man for performing the good, because his mind chose to perform actions according to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and abstain from his prohibitions. He would also punish him for performing the bad actions, because his mind chose to disobey the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do what he prohibited by responding to his instincts and organic needs in a way contrary to the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, man's accountability is right and just, because he is free to carry out his action and is not compelled in this question. The qada and qadr is irrelevant. It is rather to do with man carrying out his actions freely, and therefore he is responsible for his actions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kullu nafsin bima kasabat rahina. Every soul is a pledge for what it earned. Al-Mudaththir, verse 38. So in the previous session, we explained that man is free to carry out his actions, and that despite the fact that he didn't create attributes, the attributes that are in object and the attributes that are in living things, that is the instincts and organic needs. Despite that, they were not created in a fashion that control man. So in this case, we are talking about the aspect of their creation. That is in this paragraph that we just read. We are talking about the aspect of the creation of the things, because we mentioned in the previous session that man interacts with those things. For instance, he interacts with fire, he interacts with knife, he interacts with water, and many other things. He interacts with gold, he interacts with coal, all these objects. And man, of course, does interact with his instincts and organic needs because they are a part of him that he cannot remove. So we mentioned that these attributes, not only were they placed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in things, but they were also created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this should not be mistaken to be a reason to think that they have anything to do with human action. Rather, they do not. So as we and also as we also mentioned in the previous session and even other sessions, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created man, then he gave him instincts, then he gave him organic needs, and then the mind. He subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving man the mind is a way, like it's the key factor that separates man from animals, as we mentioned, from any other being, actually, because the mind allows man to choose whether to do or not to do something. It gives man the right and the ability to do something or not, meaning he has a choice. So one, man chooses. Secondly, after he chooses, he carries out the action himself. Because it's one thing to choose to do something, and it's another to then act according to your choice. So the mind, understanding what the role of the mind here is very important. Hence, this is the reason why the mind is the place of Sharia responsibility. This is why the child is not accounted, because his mind is not developed enough to render him able to make decisions, to make a good or bad decisions. When a child makes decisions, it's not necessarily because they are good or bad. Just like when animals make decisions, it's not because they choose to do good or bad. They're just reacting to their instincts and organic needs. But a grown-up man, someone that is a mukhallaf, meaning a responsible person, it means his mind has reached a level that it can start carrying responsibilities, which means now he is responsible for his actions. His parents or his guardians will not be questioned for him not praying. Of course, there are other aspects of have you taught him to pray and things like that. But if someone is a mukhallaf, it's all the responsibilities, the Sharia responsibilities are on him. Hence, good actions are rewarded and bad actions are punished. This is because man chooses to do them or not to do them. There is no compulsion or coercion. He chooses to respond to his instincts according to the Sharia or not according to the Sharia. He chooses to satisfy his organic needs according to the Sharia or contrary to the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As he said, therefore, man's accountability in this case is right and just because he is free to carry out his actions and is not compelled. In this question, the qada and qadar is not relevant. In this question, in this case, the subject of qada and qadar is not relevant. And I will mention a question I mentioned in the previous session. This even answers the question even more clearly, that does it mean that man's action, the consequences of his actions are not related? Because we said that the action of man has no control over the outcome. And so we have explained what the outcome means and the position of that action in terms of it being rewardable or punishable. It's something else. It has nothing to do with al-qada wal qadar, because the reward is not given for the outcome of the action, nor is the punishment. The reward or punishment is given for carrying out the action itself, regardless of the outcome. Regardless of the outcome. So if a person carries da'wah, whether he, for instance, if you discuss with a contact, you interact with hundreds, tens, 20 contacts in a day, you should, of course, you should come up with tactics, strategies. You can even put in a nawafil before meeting contacts. But the outcome of you interacting with those people is not the factor that determines whether you are rewarded for carrying the da'wah or not. This is because the obligation comes with, performing an obligation comes with automatic reward. If you perform it, then it comes with a reward. If you perform it sincerely, the best, and do it as best as you can, it comes with a reward. So if you pray salah, the 5 salawat, they come with reward. If you pray the salah as best as you can, you did your best, you deployed khushu, focus and everything, you do the sujada as best as you can, the ruku as best as you can, you recite the Quran as beautifully as you can, then you will be rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for carrying out that action, meaning within the bounds of the Sharia. It's the same thing with carrying the da'wah and any other thing. It's the same thing. You are rewarded for carrying out the action, not the outcome of the action. Of course, we carry out actions to achieve a certain value. There are 4 types of values. It's either we achieve a spiritual value, or a material value, or a humanitarian value, or a moral value. Every single action in this world achieves one of these 4 things. It's one of these 4 things. You go to work or go into business in order to achieve a material value. You pray in order to achieve a spiritual value. You help other people to achieve a moral, to achieve a humanitarian value. Although you help other people, you help widows and orphans and people in poverty, humanitarian value, to achieve humanitarian value. Moral value, you respect elders, you respect your scholars, you treat the younger ones with kindness, you behave yourself to achieve the moral value. But these values are not the criterion for action. They are not the factors that determine whether an action is good or bad, because there are actions, just like marketing, going into trade and business and going to work might get you a material value. Riba can also get you a material value. Just like going to the masjid can provide you with a spiritual value. Trust me, going to the synagogue, if you believe it, it gives you a spiritual value. Just like you feel all spiritual when you go to the masjid, when you visit Makkah, Medina, or you visit Palestine, Al-Aqsa, that is. All this, they give you spiritual value. The Jews, when they go to a synagogue, the Christians, when they go to a church, when they go to the Vatican, they all feel spiritual about it. So the thing is, the spiritual, although every action achieves a certain value, whether spiritual, humanitarian, moralistic, or material, these values are just the natural outcomes of an action. They are just the natural kind of effects of an action. They are not the determinants. They are not the determinators. They do not determine. They do not decide whether an action is good or bad. They don't. Because if that were the case, today something might be moralistic, but the next year it might not be. An example of this mindset is what we see in democratic capitalism, where in 1999 they passed the DOMA Act, Defense of Marriage Act. Bill Clinton, in his presidency, they passed that law, declaring that gay and lesbian marriages are outlawed. But fast forward to 2015, it was legalized and even celebrated nationwide in the United States of America, and even in the whole of the Western Hemisphere. So if you go to France, Britain, Germany, and all these places, LGBT is recognized and praised, and your whole celebrity, if you're a celebrity, your whole career as a celebrity might even be derailed for attacking same-sex marriage people. You see, this is a shift in morality, because back then it was considered immoralistic, indecent to engage in such acts. Now it is considered immoralistic and indecent to attack people that have made a grown-up decisions. They are grown-ups, they are adults, and if you attack them, it's just you being a bigot, an extremist, and someone that doesn't understand the nature of life. You see the shift and that this has caused. There was a time in the West, even committing zina is scoffed at. Now, if you force your child 18 or above from sleeping at her boyfriend's house or even moving out of your house, the court will provide a restraining order. The court might even force you to take care of the child, and there is nothing you can do about that because she is 18 or above. But there was a time it was immoralistic to even commit zina. The court will punish the child for doing that, and that's even after the separation of religion from life. That's even after the institution of secularism as the foundation of the whole society. But because the morals change, the morals, they made those values the foundation of deciding whether something is right or wrong, it changes. Because as time goes on, the same people or different people will come and decide there's nothing wrong with this. Hence, it's not immoralistic anymore. It's actually the most moralistic thing to do. Okay, so in Islam, the goodness or badness, so the correctness or incorrectness of an action is not determined by those values. It's determined by the action itself. The reason I'm giving this explanation, because it's like I'm explaining Mafahim, that's book 3 here, it's that we need to understand why Al-Qada wal-Qadar applies. Al-Qada wal-Qadar does not apply to the action itself, because Al-Qada wal-Qadar applies to the outcome of actions and things we have no control over. That are things that even have no relationship with our actions, yet our actions could interact with them. So like the law of the universe, we have no relation, our action has no bearing in their creation or even their behavior. And the outcome of actions, that's what our action has to do with, but it doesn't even control the outcome. Now, reward and punishment has nothing to do with the outcome. Then I'm saying that the outcome could either be, that is the value that comes out of that action. It could either be materialistic, spiritual, moralistic, or humanitarian. So that's how we reached that point about the values of actions. And so since these values are not the factors that determine how good an action is or bad, then it has to be something else. And we all know what it is, the commands and prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, the reward is not for achieving the value, because you can trade and then not achieve the materialistic value. You might even lose something materialistic. So you either gain a material value or you lose a material value. But you see, not achieving a material value does not negate the fact that you have carried out the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by doing trade and avoiding riba. وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. You see, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards you just for doing that, for engaging in trade, because He made it halal, permissible, something that is good. The outcome is not in your hands, it's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what al-qada has to do with. So when we're discussing the topic of al-qada wal-qadar, it has to do with anything that man has no control over, which includes the outcome of actions. But when we're talking about the reward and commands and prohibitions and reward and punishment, we're talking about and accountability. We're talking about carrying out the action itself. Okay, so nobody forces you to stab someone with a knife, just like nobody forces you to cut onions with a knife. You decide, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards and punishes for those things. The outcome is a totally different matter. Okay, so that's what this is saying essentially, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Kullu nafsin bima kasabat rahina." Every soul is a pledge for what it earned. Bima'ana, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do a hisab. There will be hisab on whether what you have done is good or bad. because you decided to do it. And not only did you decide, you went along, you acted according to your wishes. So I hope this is clear. I continue reading from this yellow section. He said, as for the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, IlmulLah, this does not force man to carry out an action. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that man is going to freely undertake an action. To carry out this action is not based on the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, the eternal knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means that he knows that man is going to carry out the action. With regards to the writing in the Lawhul Mahfooz, it is an expression that the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encompasses everything. So what of IlmulLah? Because if you look at it, how is it that IlmulLah is the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Okay, so which means if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his knowledge knows that you are going to be good or bad, then what's the point in trying to be good and even trying to be bad? Just wait. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows you're going to be good, you will be good. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows you're going to be bad, you'll be bad. There is even a hadith saying that you might spend your whole life being a good person, and then just before you die, you become a bad person, and it takes you to hell. You do something that takes you to hell, and one might be a bad person, but just as his life is coming to an end, his last years, last days, last weeks, last seconds, last minutes, hours, he does something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides to put him in Jannah. So if that is the case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has that knowledge. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the knowledge and is aware and knows that you're going to do something, then you know there is no doubt that that thing is going to happen, because the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is undoubtful. And whoever questions the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not even a Muslim. This is a fact. So what's the point in trying to be good? And what's the point, on the other hand, as well, of trying to be bad? Just be idle. Be like a wood, and you'll be good or bad because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. We see that doesn't make sense, because humans can't live like woods. We have to act, we have to do something. This is because in the correct understanding of IlmulLah, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is not that it has nothing to do with what has influence on your decisions and you carrying out your decisions in the form of actions. The IlmulLah, it's an indication of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the mistake we make is that we try to compare IlmulLah wa ilmul insan, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the knowledge of human beings. Our knowledge is limited to what we can sense. Our knowledge is limited to what we can sense, which is why we say if man can't sense something, then he can't comprehend it. Which means there are things we have the potential to comprehend because we have the potential to sense them. But the fact that we are not even sensing them means there is no way we are comprehending them. Let me repeat this. This is something we have explained in chapter 1, but let me repeat it. Is that the fact that there are things we have the potential to sense, okay? But if we are not in a place where we can sense them, meaning we are not at a location, at a place in space and time that we can touch them, or we can see them, or smell them, or taste them, or hear their sound, we can't comprehend their reality. We can't comprehend them. We can't have knowledge of them. Talk less of something that we are unable to sense completely. We are completely out of touch with. That is what is going to happen in the future. We can only sense the present. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the next second, next minute, next hour, the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year, the next century, the next decade, the next century, the next millennia. Nobody knows. We just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, because unlike us, he is not limited. That's what it means to say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is azali. Everything related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unlimited. You can't determine its beginning nor its end. You can't. And it will be a gross mistake that has the potential of taking one out of Islam if one starts comparing, if one starts making that mistake of saying, okay, how would Allah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, since you can't question if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be able to know what's going to happen next or in the future, yet the concern for most and many people is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows it, then what's the point? Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will determine, we should just pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides what's best for us. There's nothing wrong with praying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you what's best, because in the end, everything happens according to his decree. Yet, the meaning of everything happening according to his decree or his qadr, because this qadr I'm referring to is not the al-qadr al-qadr we have to read it. No, al-qadr is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows and is aware that you're going to do something, you are intentionally going to decide to pray. You're intentionally going to decide not to go to your halakha class. You're intentionally going to decide to discuss with that contact. You see, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond human knowledge. Our mind is limited, which is one of the things that actually shows that someone placed that limit on us. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no limit. We humans do have limit. And this should show us nothing but the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and why we should fear and obey him without questioning him, why we should ignore the slander and the threats of humans, because those humans are exactly like us. We have the potential to achieve whatever it is in this world that they can achieve. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are not even close, we are not even there, we are not even on the same path, because he created us. He placed those limitations on us. So the talk about potential shouldn't even be there. That's what this shows us. It shouldn't be a thing that causes doubt on doing the right thing. It just shows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showing you that yes, I am the Almighty. In the pride of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he knows. Unlike humans, you can only predict, and your prediction could be right and it could be wrong. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't predict. He just tells you what's going to happen, and it will definitely happen. So that's why we should fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And understand this should be a cause for strengthening iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of how great and magnanimous he is. Because his knowledge is something we can't comprehend. That is why the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, when the issue of qadr is brought up, don't discuss it. Meaning avoid it, run away from it. It's talking about the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you will be it's a slippery slope. You'll be getting yourself into trying to find a role Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Who are you? Are you out of your mind? But guess what? That's actually a double entendre. You are out of your mind because it is beyond your mind. That's what I mean. Okay? So anyway, so the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything. And the expression of Lawhul Mahfooz, it simply means that the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not know what you are going to do, it actually encompasses everything. The tiniest of things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows about it. He doesn't forget, nor does he remember, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never forgets. He knows, he's aware of them, because he created them, the environment they live in, their ancestors and everything. This is how great Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. The Sheikh said, with regards to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Iraadatul-Lah, this does not compel man to carry out any action. Its meaning, however, is that nothing can take place in his kingdom without his subhanahu wa ta'ala will. That is, nothing takes place against his will. Thus, if man carried out an action, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not prevent or compel him from doing so, and instead left him to act freely without any compulsion, then man has acted by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not contrary to his subhanahu wa ta'ala will. Man's action was undertaken by himself and by his choice, and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not compel him to carry out the action. And here's another concept that causes confusion to many. Is the Iraadatul-Lah, the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? You see, first Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, and then he has the will. Whatever we do is by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hence we say, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will do this tomorrow, I will do this later. I hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives me the opportunity to do this or that. We are seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his arada allows us to do these things. And it's true and it's correct that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows everything to happen. But it has nothing to do with compelling you to carry out an action or not carry out an action. Rather, it's saying that in the will, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's showing us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have decided to control our actions. Yet he decided not to do that. So it's saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have decided to will, in his will, he could have decided, okay, he'd be the one making us do things. But he subhanahu wa ta'ala decided not to do that. So your freedom of action, okay, not to sound like a capitalist, your freedom meaning your ability to choose, to wish for something and to act according to your wish or even against your wish, it's by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you that ability. You remember we mentioned that the attributes of things cannot be negated except in the case of the prophets. And that's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes happen in order to prove that they are prophets. For instance, when Prophet Ibrahim, in his time, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the fire cool down and unable to burn Ibrahim alayhi salam. This is the Iraadatul-Lah in action. Because it's by the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that fire burns. And because we have this concept that there is no way fire doesn't burn, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has created that way, and because we have been able to sense it and comprehend it, so we established it as a fact that fire burns. But in the incident of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed us that no, it's not that fire burns, we will it to burn. And we have decided we won't change that. But if it's a prophet, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes miracles, mu'jizat happen, so that to prove that they are prophets. For instance, it's by the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that nobody in this on this whole earth will be able to come up with anything similar to the Quran. Because normally, someone should be able to come up with something similar or even better than it. But because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed it, nobody will be able to. That's the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in action. So your ability to do things freely, it's by the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes you to do those things. No, He willed that you will be able to choose. He decided that. So that's what Iraadatul-Lah means. It has nothing to do with forcing you to carry an action or not. No. It doesn't. This is the issue of al-qada wal-qadar, which will drive man to do good and avoid bad when he realizes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching him and will account him for his actions, and that he has endowed him with the choice or to act or abstain. And if he does not choose the right actions, he will be severely reprimanded and punished. Therefore, we find the true believer who understands sincerely the concept of al-qada wal-qadar and who is fully acquainted with the mental faculties and choice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed him with, is very conscious in observing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's orders and being afraid of him. He endeavors to comply with the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to abstain from the prohibitions because of his fear of the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his desire to be in his Jannah, and his yearning in attaining that which is greater than all of this, namely the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ridwanullah. So, and this is absolutely true, that if one understands al-qada wal-qadar, then he becomes organized. I think I remember mentioning that understanding al-qada wal-qadar helps one become a better person in organization, because, or rather prioritization. Yes, prioritization. Because then you prioritize based on the things you have control over. You spend more time trying to achieve things that you have influence over, rather than abandoning things you have control over and then focusing on things you have no control over, which means it's a huge and faulty risk. You're taking the risk of abandoning, for instance, an obligation, carrying out an obligation. Because if you remember, for instance, when it comes to carrying the da'wah, your obligation is not to convince the person, although that's your aim, it's the value you want to achieve. Now, I'm not trying to say, okay, just carry the da'wah, discuss with people, and don't bother yourself about convincing them. No, remember, we did mention that when you're carrying out an action, when you're carrying out an obligation or sunnah, or even avoiding makruh and avoiding haram or performing mubah, you have to do it to the best of your ability. That's fulfilling the obligation or fulfilling the sunnah. You have to do it to the best of your ability. And the best of your ability is trying to do your best to convince that person to change his understanding, to bring change to the whole world, to establish the khilafah, to establish the salah, to establish the zakah, to establish jihad, to establish siyam, to establish hajj, whichever ibadah or any action you are undertaking, because it's a fact that it is a fact. It has to be according to the Sharia, but you have to try your best to do it. But you shouldn't feel despair that I have discussed with 10 people, for instance. I have discussed with 10 people and I have not been able to convince any one of them. It's a good habit of the Muslim to try to become better, try to understand Islam better, because understanding Islam, that's what it means when we say understand the culture better. It's understanding Islam better, studying Islam better, so that you'll be able to be more articulate and better in explaining your arguments, making your points clearer rather. Yes, you should do your best, but you shouldn't feel despair, because it might be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing your resolve and you don't know. So you should keep trying your best. So if we discuss with people, it's not big and they refuse or reject our understanding, okay, let's think. What's within my control is the outcome. Subhanallah. What's within my control? Carrying out the action, carrying the da'wah. It's within my control to improve my understanding. But is it within my control to convince them? No. So what you should do, you shouldn't be worried that they are not convinced. Rather, what should I do to improve myself, to increase my chances of convincing them? Because the truth is, it's not because we are good. Achieving this obligation, achieving any objective, it's not because we are good enough that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this success. It's not because we are good enough. It's not because we have the best understanding. It's not because we are the best people on earth that we are even carrying the da'wah, or that we pray, or that we do things. No. It's just that we are trying to do our best, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wallahu balighu amri. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always fulfills his matter. When he promises something, he fulfills it. وَعَلَى اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كَمَا اسْتَخْلَفَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, He will. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised those among you that believe in Him, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and do good acts, good deeds, that He will provide them with the authority on this earth, just like the way He gave it to those people that came before you. Walakin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just give you this victory, He mentions that He tests you. وَلَنَبَلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling that He will test you with all sorts of things. But وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, be patient. Because مَنْ يَنْصُرُ اللَّهَ يَنْصُرُهُ, whoever helps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps him. As we always mention, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need your help. Meaning if you play your role, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides you success. But He didn't say just because you are good at it, you'll get this success. No. He determines when to give you the success. So just keep being good. Keep doing what you have been commanded to do. Meaning, it's one thing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to oblige you to do something. It's another for you to achieve something, to achieve the objective. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set the objective. The objective is A. And the actions you should be carrying out are B and C. So do B and C in order to achieve A. If you're unable to achieve A, you should try. Of course, you can revisit your understanding, try to do better, carry out better actions, be much more committed. All these things, they are within your control, which is carrying out the action. The achievement is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the topic. This is what Al-Qadr is teaching us, that we should know we can't relax and abandon our action, lying to ourselves or telling ourselves that it's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is not the case. Yes, the victory is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but carrying out the action is in our hands. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that ability. That's why we have never seen the Sahaba saying it's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not doing anything. When the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the battle of Khandaq, he hit a stone and he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has opened Rome and hit this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has opened this Syria. He hit this and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has opened this land for me. The Sahaba radiallahu anhu would say, well, we are busy digging this trench, this Khandaq. in order to protect ourselves from the Quraysh and their allies, the Confederates, the Ahzab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us victory even beyond the Arabian Peninsula, which means whether we defend ourselves from the Quraysh or not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expel them. So let's just go sleep, drink milk, do tasbih, recite the Quran, memorize the sayings of Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, pray throughout the night. Don't waste your time fighting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps. He has promised us. We heard the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saying it, for God's sake. Unlike us, they heard him saying it. They saw him saying it. So it's definite to them. Yet, instead of doing that, they did the total opposite, which is they increased their effort. They exerted more effort towards achieving that. They prepared for a battle. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to send a heavy wind that scared the Quraysh and they ran away. You see, in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally intervened by sending a wind. But just like we say, you don't know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows or what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to do, so just play your role. And they played their roles by protecting themselves. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarded them with something even better than their khandaq. So the Sahaba always understood, the Muslims always understood that you don't sleep and say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us victory. The Khilafah will return when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. Yes, that's true. Has nothing to do with you carrying out the action to revive it, to bring it back. Because it's one thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that can enable the resumption of the Islamic State. Is another for you to work towards it. Because in reality, you think about it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need you to do anything. Kun fayakun, and it be and it be. وَإِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُنْ فَيَكُنْ. And when he has decided, decreed something, فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُنْ فَيَكُنْ. He just says, be and it be. So it's not because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs us. We need to do this for our own sake. Any obligation we carry out is not because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs us to help him. When he said, مَنْ يَنْصُرَ اللَّهَ يَنْصُرُهُ, he's not saying that he actually needs our help. He's just saying, whoever wants something from me, then I will give it to him. So you help Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you. Meaning, if you help yourself, I will help you. وَيُثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَكُمْ. And to even re-emphasize, let's understand something. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, مَنْ يَنْصُرِ اللَّهَ, we should understand something. The real Arabic, the Arabic in origin, if you remove man, it should be yansuru, marfu, bil fath, bil dhamma, because it's a mudari, present tense. So yansuru, fi'lun mudari'un marfu'un bil dhamma. That's how it should be. Yansuru, man yansuru Allah yansuru. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sorry, it should be yansuruna because it came in the plural form. So it should be yansuruna Allah. Who, if you help, being in the plural, if you people, the ummah, help Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, man yansuru. Hence it became with waw and the alif to indicate that it is majzoom, meaning he has eliminated the noon that indicates the raf. So it is yansuruna in origin, fi'lun mudari'un marfu'un bi thibatun nun, meaning it is a normal present tense that says if you just do something without any extra effect on it. Then the next yansur should be yansurullah, marfu'un bi dhamma. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to say man. Now this man, the scholars of Anahu would say it is min adawatil jazm. What it does, it places a condition. Hence it says adatu shart wa jawabu shart, meaning the element, the particle of condition and the result of the condition. So the condition is man yansurullah, whoever helps Allah, meaning if you help Allah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you. Meaning the opposite is true. If you don't help Allah, Allah won't help you. Iraadatul-Lah wa Jawab-ul-Shart. The particle of condition and the result of the condition. You help Allah, Allah helps you. You refuse to help, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't help you. But when we say help, remember, it's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs your help. No, you help yourself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps you. Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change a people. He does not help a people until they help themselves. If you align it with this verse of man yansurullah yansurhum. Man yansurullah yansurhum. If a people help Allah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps them. Meaning, if you want to achieve something, play your role. If you refuse to play your role, you will forever be suffering in your fatalistic pragmatism. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us. Jazakumullahu bi khairin. And finally, we have come to the end of this chapter, and I hope the sessions on this topic has been clear. If anyone has any question or comment, and as I emphasized, please make comments. And if you have any question, you can ask. If I don't answer it, there are many people here that can answer it, inshallah. Feel free to make comments. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The room for questions and comments is open.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Jazakallah khair for that exposition. Alhamdulillah, it was quite detailed and clear. I'd like to make a comment. Because this chapter, this topic is quite a heavy one for most newcomers and people who are doing it for the first time, and some for the second time. You become a mushif, and then you have to explain to someone, and then you actually understand it. But there you go. I'd like to take us back to the bottom of page 31, where it talks about Iraadatul-Lah. Yes, this is quite a heavy topic, section, which affects the Ummah today, because when you talk about the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is overwhelming for the Muslim who has iman in Allah and understands His power. Because the irada of Allah is that which sustains existence itself, right? He not only did He create it, but He sustains it. Some scholars actually explain that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates a thing, its creation is not just, He creates it and then He releases it and it just continues to exist. No, they said that when He creates it, He continues to sustain its very existence at every moment it exists. That is the extent of His power. And they go on to explain, in so many different facets and ways, which really, it's a good thing because it really shows you and gets you to understand the sheer power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His capacity to control and maintain things. Now, what this does is, in the wrong context, it makes Muslims complacent. Because they think, subhanAllah, Allah is so powerful, it's like you said, why are you even working for Khilafah? When Allah wills, this thing will drop, So just carry on and be a nice Muslim, be moral, and be an example and so on and so forth. So the reason I took, I'm sorry about the background noise. Could you please control the reason I took us back to this paragraph is because I wanted to highlight the magic word with regards to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's actually a magic word in that paragraph that just, explains everything away. It continues to say its meaning, however, is that nothing can take place in His kingdom without His will. I.e., that is, nothing takes place against His will. That word against is the magic word, because that puts everything in context. Because we need to understand when it says against his will, it means that it then explains why we cannot be complacent. Because that point explains why we cannot be complacent. Why? Because if man has free will and he's acting freely to do good or otherwise, meaning to obey the commandments of Allah or to disobey Allah, using the free will that Allah gave him, that is also acting according to the will of Allah. Why? Because man using his free will is not acting against the will of Allah. So if the Ummah would understand this, it would make a world of a difference. Because then you realize, wait a minute, the free choice that I have and the free choice that I'm using, it still holds me accountable. Do you see? So I'm still accountable because I have free will. And my use or lack thereof of free will does not negate the irada of Allah. In fact, I am acting according to his irada by choosing, because that's what he willed, for me to have free will to choose. And that's why I say it's the magic word. Because you choosing your free will, it doesn't make you go against the will of Allah. So for instance, if angels had choice, I mean, in a weird way, sort of way, if you could think about it, angels don't have choice. That is going against the will of Allah. They don't have a choice. They are created without choice, unlike us. So if these Hollywood movies and what have you, they really, they just tend to show angels like human beings. They have a choice. They decide to, it's really silly, yeah. But that means they're going against it would mean, that they're going against their creation, which they cannot. And which is the point this line is saying. You cannot go against his will. So Muslims, human beings, have free will, and that free will is in line with Iraadatul-Lah. It does not change the fact that Allah is in control of everything, and therefore you should therefore conclude, okay, he'll do it himself. He'll just bring about the desire himself, and I need not do anything. Actually, you're still accountable for not obeying him and his will. So hence the explanation. And unfortunately, we're here today because of this Greek philosophical mishmash that has messed up our understanding of the irada of Allah and our actions and what we're accountable for and what we're not accountable for. Sorry, I don't mean to give another lecture, which I probably have. Apologies, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to highlight this point.
Thank you very much for the comment. This is actually one of the things we want in the session, for everyone to jump in and add. And this is what I mentioned at the beginning of the session, that someone might add an angle that we haven't mentioned at all here. So please don't hesitate if anyone has any more comment or question. Next week, inshallah, we'll be starting with the intellectual leadership. Wa alaikum salam. Okay, I saw that someone was trying to make a comment.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Yeah, I thought it was the end, but so quickly so that I don't take up our time. Like you mentioned, also Salu mentioned, this is a fairly complicated part for all beginners, and I recall I had to grapple with it quite a bit, and then I realized that I had to keep on explaining to either contacts or generally as you give a talk, that if you bother, like Sally said, with regard to the philosophical angle that people get neck deep in, is if you take it simply that Allah knows, okay, and you don't know, and then Allah says, pray 5 times a day, go to Hajj, and then I say, okay, what has pray 5 times a day got to do with knowing whether Allah knows that you're going to pray 5 times a day or not? It's an instruction, yes. Are you obeying it, yes or no? It's as simple as that. You're bothering with whether Allah knows the end of it, so why should you do it? Who asked you to go down that road? So basically, I found, so correct me if I'm wrong, that it was sort of a simplification of looking at it from the part of action, of command, that if you're commanded to do something, obey it. Now, sitting around wondering about what you're not commanded to do is a serious waste of time that, again, ironically, you do not have. Assalamu
alaikum. Thank you very much. This is a very, these are all both very important points in the sense that they're just really emphasizing that despite the fact that we do know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, yet He, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that knows everything, decided to command us to do something. So our concern is, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to do something, let's just do it. Let's not waste our time wondering why, what's going to happen next. Let's focus on now, because you might die right now. So if you're wondering, okay, if I do this for the next 10 years, is it going to succeed? You might not last 10 years. You might not last even a year. You don't know. So just do what's right by you now, so that on the day of judgment, it serves as a plus for you in the ways of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anyone has any comment or question, please?
Hello, assalamu alaikum. It's me again.
Alaikum assalam.
Before we pop out of the chapter, you must have covered it in a previous session, which I was not around. Otherwise, I would have endeavored to make the comment. So my apologies if I can take us just a bit way back to page 27, when it talks about when it's talking about qadar, the attributes of objects and attributes of instincts and organic needs, right?
No.
And well, you did allude to it. You mentioned it in this session when you talked about the fire and Ibrahim alayhi salam, and Allah commanded the fire to cool for him. So the fire lost its attribute of burning, but for him alone. And I tend to make this point when I'm discussing with in halakha. I said, if you happen to be standing at the point where Ibrahim alayhi salam was chucked into the fire, if you made the mistake of putting your finger into the fire, it would burn you. Because the cooling was specific to him, not to anyone else. And that is the mu'jiza. But that's not the point I want to make. Sorry. The actual point I want to make is it also talked about the attributes of instincts, right? Which are part of the qadar. They are attributes put in there by the creator of the instincts and the organic needs and the objects, right? And it specifically says man has no role in any of that. We may not realize, but, and yes, then it continues to point out that when the attributes of things, when things lose their attributes, it only occurs once. Not once, I mean it only occurs in one situation. Sorry, not once, but in one situation. And that is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using it to prove to a people that a person he sent is a messenger. When the messenger performs a certain action to amaze the people, because the thing is nigh impossible, but it happens for him. And what it is the thing loses its attribute. And that is it. So for Ibrahim alayhi salam, it was a fire not burning. For Musa alayhi salam, it was the staff turning into a snake. It was the splitting of the Red Sea. Suddenly liquid water turns into a solid structure, which is impossible unless you watch a lot of Hollywood movies that I keep alluding to. So this is the reality. Now, in this day and age today, here now, the Ummah, because we're in decline, we have a shallow level of thinking, our thought is not so deep, so we are affected by very superficial things, easily. Superstition, witchcraft, all sorts of things. People say jinn, possession, and so on and so forth. You see, because it's related to decline and the low level of thought, which is normal, by the way, in all declined societies. You find declined societies exhibit these kind of very backwards ideas. When you look at the Europe in the Middle Ages, they were very superstitious. They believed in possession. They believed in witches. They burnt so many poor women at the stake, it's uncountable, because of their declined nature. Today, when they talk about it, it's literally, oh, look at how backwards we were. Look at how superstitious we were, which in that reality is actually correct. But the funny thing is the Ummah is actually in the spot where the West or the Europeans were in their Middle Ages. in the age of decline and superstition and backwardness. What has this got to do with Qadar? Sorry. The point is, the Ummah today does not realize that anyone who claims to have power over somebody or can do stuff for you, do this, slaughter this, do that, and then this will happen for you, it entails making things lose their attributes, their natural attributes, which is not possible for this makhluk, this created thing to do, this created creature to do. So you see, as dawah carriers and as, we must also carry this clear-cut understanding and divest ourselves, if we carry these ideas, of this weakness in thinking, that the capacity to change the attributes of things, some people have this capacity. Wallahi, they don't. It only happens for prophets, by the will of Allah. That is it. So you see, it has a very narrow scope of occurrence, and it ain't gonna happen anymore because there are no more prophets, right? So this part of what we need to also, because it's so far spread in our societies today that people believe in all these witchcraft and witch doctors and possession, and they explain also, and it leads to giving excuses for some people to not do certain actions, or for people to do certain actions of which they are not held accountable because they were possessed, or or something came over them, and what have you. This is all related to weakness in our thought structure and decline. So this is just a little part of Qadar. Sorry, again, I've been going on a bit, but this is just another angle of Qadar we could realize and apply, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you very much for this comment as well, because it's quite important. And another point I make about superstitious things, and so this it's very important, because I think I remember mentioning this, that if you look at superstitious nations, you'll find out they are mostly poor, but it's not the poverty that leads them into superstition. As a matter of fact, it's the declined mindset. But then declined societies, if they are not poor, they are even if they are rich, they are busy wondering about useless and unimportant things that have nothing to do with reality. So if you ask yourself, have you ever heard anyone in the United States or in Germany or in Britain or in France or in the Netherlands saying that, okay, I have jinn, or I know someone that has jinn? You see, if your business is removing jinn, then move from Germany and back to Nigeria or Pakistan. So if you look at it, you see that it's places like Nigeria, Pakistan, and India, places that are declined intellectually and that are poor. But even if they are not poor, it has nothing to do with the poverty. It's just that it's one of the manifestations that declined societies are usually poor. But if you look at places like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait, they are all declined, and they also have this problem of that comes with declined mindset and so on and so forth. So Jazakumullah bi khairin. I think we will end it here, unless if anyone has any short comment or question, inshallah. Okay, Mr. Ustad Ademi, can you? And there is. Please carry on, Mr. Ahmad.
No. Can I talk?
Yes, please. Yes. Yes, please.
No, but I'm not trying to ask a question. A question more like the question. It's like trying to relate that work with time now. Given a case study of the Ikhwan movement. Now, there was a time back I read something about the Ikhwan movement. They said, looking at the dawah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Rasulullah spent 10 years in Mecca and 13 years in Medina to build Islamic State. Now they came out with a framework that if you spend the active 10 years in carrying the dawah, then having 13 more years should be able to produce the results of Islamic State. Now I want to have a question here, that judging with time, acting with time, does timing? Look at, for example, look at the 23 years of dawah, 23 years of dawah of the Prophet. Does timing has relevance to the dawah result?
No.
As a dawah career, do we consider time as the premises for dawah actions, or do we base it on the order of Allah? As we know, as you said, that putting all human effort into action is one of the factors needed in actions. Now, should we just base our action based on the order of Allah, neglecting time or without working with time, or should we just have a time frame for that for objective? Why? I don't know if my question is being is clear enough.
No. So as we mentioned that when we carry out actions, we should try our best. We should carry out those actions to the best of our abilities. And we also mentioned that actions are judged by the commands and prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the sense that it's carrying out the actions and not carrying out the actions that is either rewarded or punished. So if you carry out an action, you are either rewarded or you are punished for it. Or if you refuse to carry out an action, like refusing to carry the da'wah, you are punished for it. And if you carry the da'wah, you are rewarded for it. We also mentioned that the outcome of actions are not within the control of man. This is because man can only influence and decide whether he should do something or not. But what comes of it is not within man's control. As for time, as for establishing a time frame, then it's a good thing in terms of planning for you to say that, okay, I want to achieve this in 2 months, 3 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20, 25, 30 years to achieve this and that. But it doesn't mean because you have planned well, you'll be able to achieve that objective just by acting according to the timeline you have set within your plan. Because as we mentioned, this is within the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not ours. But as we also mentioned, what's the best thing for us humans is to do our best, is to do what's within our control. We shouldn't bother ourselves on how long it takes. Yes, we might be worried, okay, this is taking too long for me to achieve this and that. Am I doing something wrong? You can reassess, and if they are doing something wrong, you correct it. If you are not doing wrong, then you continue doing whatever it is that you have been doing, and waiting for the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the time that something is achieved has nothing to do with its success or failure. This is because if the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam achieved his objectives in 10 years and 23 years, fully establishing the Islamic State and spreading it within 23 years, then what of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, who has been carrying the da'wah for 950 years without achieving it? Now, someone might say, well, this is from the prophets of the past, and shara' min qablana laysa shara'an lana. But then in this case, it has nothing to do with the shari'ah, it has to do with the issue of understanding. It's actually an aqidah matter, meaning understanding where victory comes from. It comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't come from us. Prophet Nuh alayhi salam has been carrying this da'wah, calling people to Islam for 950 years, yet they scoffed at him and they rejected him and they bullied anyone that accepted Islam. And they pushed them out of their land until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent fitna on them. So what I'm saying here is that the time that Rasulullah spent achieving something was determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Rasulullah himself was not aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to give him victory at this certain point. Okay? He might have thought the victory would come earlier or later. But he waited for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy to take place, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him this victory. So the success of the da'wah has nothing to do with the time it was taken to achieve it. Rather, what we should be concerned about is the actions, it's the fulfillment of the Shari'i conditions. Are we carrying this da'wah according to the Sharia? Are we carrying this da'wah, meaning according to the commands and prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If yes, then we should come up with styles and means that can compensate and achieve this. If we are doing our best, then we are not at fault. It's when we refuse to carry out this obligation, telling ourselves that the victory will come when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accounts us for not doing anything. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accounts us, it's that we are carrying out the obligation. Time has nothing to do with it. And the explanation that was given of the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just to briefly re-summarize, is that the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's His will. And His will is that by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, we are able to do things by choice. Because if you look at the angels, it's by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will that they don't have a choice. لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. They do not go against the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they do what they are told. They are commanded this because it's in their nature to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like it's in our nature that we can decide to obey or disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to obey Him, yet He knows we can decide not to obey Him because He has given us that ability. Okay, He has given us that ability. So that's the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if He wills we achieve the return of the Khilafah today, then we achieve it. But we can't be carrying out haphazard actions, randomly acting and saying, oh, since it's the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will come back. No. We have to do it according to the Sharia. We have to do our best, deploy the best of styles and means that we can come up with in order to achieve this obligation. As long as it's within this bound and not exceeding the bounds of the Sharia, then it's okay. But the victory, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides it. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides it. There is this verse from, usually it's not, anyway. So there are so many instances. If you look at the seerah of the Sahaba, the Sahaba and the prophets, and if you look at their history, their lives, you see that they have struggled against a lot of things. They achieved victory, and some of them, it took them a very long time. Some, it took them a very short time to achieve it. It's all in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What was required of the prophets was to carry out the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Musa alayhi salam faced Fir'aun in his might. If it were today, people will start saying, it's impossible. Just like we look at the United States of America, thinking it's not possible. You see, Musa alayhi salam was not worried about how long it would take for him to achieve that obligation. Yet, it's part of human ability to plan according to time. Okay, let's plan to achieve this within 6 months, within 2 months, within 3 months. This is just something we're doing. It doesn't mean we will definitely achieve it. As a matter of fact, we can achieve more than we plan to. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us that the outcome is not in our hands. You might plan to achieve, maybe you plan to achieve 50% increase in your business. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides you achieve 150%. You see, or He might decide you don't even achieve 5%. You see, the two opposites could happen. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could decide it will be a decrease no matter how perfect you executed your plan within that time frame, within that timeline. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might decide you achieve even better. The thing is, you I hope this clarifies it. Well, yeah. So I think inshallah we'll stop here, and we will start a new chapter next week, the intellectual leadership of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. أمة واحدة دولة واحدة راية